Why did 9 million people follow a teenage girl into war? France in crisis. In 1412, a girl named Jeanne d'Arc was born in a small village called Domremy in northeastern France. At the time, France was not a united nation. It was a broken kingdom, torn apart by nearly a century of war with England. This war would later be called the 100 Years' War. But to the people living through it, it was simply chaos. The French monarchy was on the verge of collapse. English armies had invaded from the north. The countryside was full of mercenaries, bandits, and soldiers switching loyalties. Entire towns were burned to the ground. The King of France, Charles VI, was mentally unstable. At times, he didn't recognize his own family. During his frequent breakdowns, the real power fell to competing nobles. The most powerful were the Armagnacs, who supported the king's son, the Dauphin Charles, and the Burgundians, who made a separate alliance with England. In 1415, at the Battle of Agincourt, the French nobility suffered a devastating defeat. Thousands of knights were killed in the mud by English longbowmen. It was a humiliating loss, and it gave the English more momentum to take even more French territory. That same year, Jeanne was only 3 years old. Her family were farmers. They weren't rich or powerful. They had no reason to be involved in politics or war. But they lived in a part of France where the war never truly disappeared. Raids were common. Nearby villages were destroyed. Joan grew up hearing stories about French defeats and English cruelty. She went to church, helped her family tend the fields, and lived a very ordinary life. But sometime around the age of 13, something changed. She began to tell people that she had received visions, and that she had heard the voices of saints. By the time she was a teenager, Joan of Arc claimed that she heard voices. She said they first came to her when she was about 13 years old, in her father's garden. At first, the message was simple: to live a good life, to attend church, and to remain virtuous. But over time, the messages became clearer and more demanding. She claimed that the voices belonged to 3 saints: Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. They told her that God had chosen her for a mission. That mission was not small. According to her, she was to help drive the English out of France and to take the Dauphin, the uncrowned Charles VII, to Reims, where he would be crowned king. It would have been absurd for anyone to believe her. She was a peasant girl who had never left her village. She couldn't read or write. She had no money, no weapons, and no experience. She wasn't a noble. She wasn't even allowed to join the army. And yet Joan believed that she had been chosen, and she believed that her mission was real. For a while, she didn't act. She stayed quiet and waited. But as the war grew worse, she became convinced that she could wait no longer. 1428, when Joan was 16, she went to a nearby garrison in Vaucouleurs and asked to be taken to see the Dauphin Charles. She was laughed at. She was told to go home, but she came back again and again. Eventually, she spoke to a local commander named Robert de Baudricourt. Her persistence made an impression, and after several months, he agreed to help her. She was given men to escort her across France, a dangerous journey of nearly 300 miles through enemy-controlled territory. She disguised herself in men's clothing for protection. The group traveled mostly by night to avoid detection. When she finally arrived at Chinon, the Dauphin's court was in chaos. France was losing the war. Orléans, a key city on the Loire River, was under siege by the English. If it fell, the rest of France would likely fall with it. Joan asked to meet the Dauphin. He agreed, but he decided to test her. He hid himself in the crowd and had another man pretend to be him. Joan walked past the impostor, approached the real Charles, and bowed. She claimed that God had sent her to help him save France. Something about her words, or the way she spoke, convinced him to listen. She was allowed to stay at court while church authorities investigated her. They questioned her for weeks. They tried to find evidence of heresy or deception. They found none. By early 1429, Joan, a 17-year-old girl with no formal education or training, was granted armor, a banner, and a place at the front of the French army. Her first mission: break the siege of Orléans. Orléans had been under siege by the English since October 1428. The city was one of the last strongholds protecting the southern half of France. If it fell, the English could cross the Loire River and continue their campaign deeper into French territory. The French army had tried and failed to lift the siege. Morale was low. Supplies were running out. Many believed the fall of Orléans was only a matter of time. Joan arrived in the city in April 1429. She rode in dressed in white armor, carrying a banner that displayed an image of Christ. She was accompanied by experienced military commanders, but she had no formal rank or title. What she brought instead was something the army hadn't felt in years: confidence. Joan did not direct battle tactics, but she participated in military councils and stood on the front lines. She insisted that they attack, even when others hesitated. Over the course of just 9 days, French forces, inspired by Joan's presence and relentless encouragement, launched a series of assaults on the English fortifications. Joan was wounded by an arrow, but returned to the battlefield after a short recovery. On May 8, 1429, the English lifted the siege and retreated. It was a turning point. The French army had secured its most significant victory in years, and much of the credit was given to the teenage girl from Domremy. After Orléans, Joan's influence grew quickly. The victory energized France. For the first time in decades, people believed that Charles could truly become king. But there was one obstacle: tradition. To be officially crowned King of France, Charles had to be anointed in the cathedral at Reims. But Reims was deep in enemy territory, and most of the cities on the way were controlled by English or Burgundian forces. Charles's advisors hesitated. The risk was high, but Joan was firm. She believed it was God's will for him to be crowned, and that the people would welcome him along the way. They decided to take the chance. In June 1429, Charles's army, with Joan at the front, began the march toward Reims. As they approached town after town, something remarkable happened. Cities began to surrender without a fight. Local leaders opened their gates. Word of Joan's involvement had spread, and many believed that she was under divine protection. On July 17, 1429, Charles VII was crowned in Reims Cathedral. Joan stood by his side holding her banner. It was the moment she had been waiting for. Her mission, as she understood it, was complete, but the war was far from over. After the coronation, Joan believed they should press the advantage. Paris was still under English and Burgundian control, and she wanted to lead a campaign to take it. But not everyone agreed. Many of Charles's advisors were more interested in diplomacy than conquest. They believed the coronation would help negotiate peace. Joan, however, believed peace would only come through complete victory. She launched a campaign toward Paris in September 1429. This time, the results were disappointing. The attack on Paris failed. Joan was injured again, and her forces were forced to retreat. Her political support began to decline. Some nobles were uneasy about her growing fame. Others resented taking orders from someone outside the established hierarchy. By early 1430, Joan found herself sidelined. She continued to campaign in small operations, but no longer had the full backing of the royal court. On May 23, 1430, Joan was captured during a skirmish near the city of Compiègne. She was surrounded by Burgundian soldiers and pulled from her horse. She was taken prisoner. And Charles VII, the king she had helped crown, made no attempt to rescue her. Joan's capture marked the beginning of a long and painful ordeal. She was imprisoned by the Burgundians, who later sold her to the English for 10,000 livres, a high price for a high-profile prisoner. She was transferred to Rouen, where the English intended to destroy not just her body, but her reputation. Joan had become a symbol of French resistance, and the English wanted to discredit her completely. But rather than trying her as a prisoner of war, they charged her with heresy. This wasn't just a legal strategy, it was political. If they could prove that Joan was a heretic, it would call into question the legitimacy of Charles VII's coronation. After all, his entire rise had been supported by someone claiming to speak for God. The trial was not fair. Joan was not allowed a legal advisor. She was held in a secular prison under English guards, which violated church law, and her judges were not neutral. Many were pro-English clergy, hand-picked for the task. The trial of the century. Joan was dragged to Rouen, the English stronghold in Normandy. There, behind the cold walls of a prison cell, her next battle began, not with a sword, but with words. Her trial was never meant to be fair. It was political theater, meant to dismantle her reputation and frame her as a heretic. The court was stacked against her. She was denied legal counsel. The bishop leading the charge, Pierre Cochon, was a loyalist to the English cause. Over 70 charges were brought against her: sorcery, heresy, blasphemy, and wearing men's clothes. But behind all those accusations was one aim: discredit her, so the English could dismiss her victories as the work of the devil. But Joan did not cower. Despite being interrogated for hours each day, despite being kept in a damp prison cell, despite threats of torture, she held firm. Her answers were intelligent, measured, and often brilliant. When asked if she knew she was in God's grace, a question designed to trap her into heresy, she responded, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." This wasn't just a trial, it was a spiritual war. And Joan, uneducated in theology, was outthinking scholars and priests. Eventually, the court wore her down. Isolated, under duress, and threatened with death by fire, she signed an abjuration, a document recanting her visions, but her conscience wouldn't allow it. Within days, she withdrew her confession, saying she only signed out of fear. That sealed her fate. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan was led out to the old market square in Rouen. She was 19 years old. The crowd was enormous. Soldiers, citizens, monks, all gathered to witness the execution of the so-called heretic. A tall wooden stake was set in the center, surrounded by bundles of dry wood. Joan was tied to it, her white dress fluttering in the breeze. A priest held a crucifix before her eyes. She begged for a church to be built in her name. She cried out the name of Jesus over and over as the flames were lit. Eyewitnesses said that even the executioner wept. One English soldier murmured, "We are lost. We have burned a saint." Her ashes were thrown into the sand to prevent relics from being gathered, but her memory could not be erased. Joan's death did not kill her legend. It fueled it. In the years that followed, her story spread across Europe. Soldiers remembered her as their savior. The poor remembered her as one of their own. And decades later, her family petitioned for her name to be cleared. In 1456, a retrial was held, this time with no politics to obscure the truth. Witnesses from every stage of Joan's life testified: soldiers, priests, villagers, nobles. The verdict: Joan was innocent. Her original trial was declared invalid and corrupt. Centuries passed. Revolutions came and went. France changed, but Joan endured. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, Joan of Arc was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Today, she stands as one of the most iconic figures in world history. Statues rise in her honor. Her story is taught in schools, told in plays and films. She is a symbol of courage, conviction, and resistance. A warrior saint who never abandoned her beliefs, even in the face of death. And why did 9 million people follow her? Because she embodied something eternal, not just hope, not just bravery, but absolute faith in herself, in her God, and in the future she believed in. She didn't come from a palace. She had no royal blood. She wasn't born to command armies or change the fate of a nation. But she did. All because she believed. And that belief, so rare, so pure, so unshakable, was enough to move millions. Thank you for watching. If Joan's story inspired you, subscribe for more incredible histories where truth is more powerful than legend.